For centuries, the Arctic was treated as the edge of the map, a frozen void that explorers feared, empires ignored, and global trade simply worked around. But that perception is now collapsing in real time as rising global temperatures begin to melt the ice that once made the region nearly impenetrable. What is being revealed is far more valuable than anyone imagined, not just vast reserves of untapped natural resources, but an entirely new network of global trade routes. These routes could reshape the balance of economic power in the 21st century, turning what was once a hostile wilderness into one of the most strategically important regions on Earth. The idea of an Arctic gold rush is not an exaggeration, but a reflection of the scale of opportunity now emerging. Beneath the Arctic seabed lies an estimated 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of its undiscovered natural gas. Alongside these are rare earth minerals, precious metals, and fisheries that are becoming increasingly accessible as ice coverage retreats year after year. This creates a situation where nations are no longer just observing the Arctic, but actively positioning themselves to claim, control, and capitalize on its resources. The dynamics resemble historical gold rushes, but the stakes are far higher, and the geopolitical implications far more complex. At the center of this transformation are the new Arctic shipping routes. These routes are rapidly shifting from theoretical possibilities to practical alternatives to traditional global trade corridors. The most important among them include the Northern Sea Route along Russia's coastline, the Northwest Passage through the Canadian Arctic Archipelago, and the Transpolar Sea Route that cuts directly across the central Arctic Ocean. Each of these offers dramatically shorter distances between major markets in Europe, Asia, and North America. Compared to routes like the Suez Canal or the Panama Canal, they reduce travel time by thousands of kilometers and potentially save billions of dollars in fuel and operational costs for shipping companies willing to navigate these once forbidden waters. The Northern Sea Route has already seen significant development. Russia has invested heavily in icebreaker fleets, port infrastructure, and navigation systems to make the route viable for commercial shipping. This positions Russia as a gatekeeper of Arctic trade by requiring foreign vessels to use Russian pilots and pay transit fees. Geography becomes leverage in this context, allowing Russia to exert influence over one of the most promising new trade corridors in the world. At the same time, the route is being integrated into broader economic and strategic plans, including energy exports and military presence in the region. The Northwest Passage presents a different kind of opportunity and challenge. It weaves through Canada's Arctic islands and offers a shorter path between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. However, it remains less developed and more politically contested. Canada asserts sovereignty over these waters, while other nations, including the United States, view it as an international strait. This creates legal ambiguity that could influence how freely the route can be used in the future. At the same time, melting ice is making it increasingly navigable during certain months of the year, raising the possibility of more consistent commercial use. The Transpolar Sea Route represents perhaps the most transformative possibility of all. It would allow ships to travel directly across the Arctic Ocean without hugging coastlines. This creates the shortest possible path between major global markets and could potentially bypass existing choke points entirely. However, this route depends heavily on continued ice melt and advancements in ship design and navigation technology. For now, it remains a longer-term prospect, but one that captures the imagination of policymakers, economists, and corporations looking to the future of global trade. As these routes open up, they are not just changing shipping patterns, but also reshaping the strategic priorities of nations. Control over Arctic access points, infrastructure, and resources is becoming increasingly valuable. This is leading to a new kind of geopolitical competition. Arctic nations like Russia, Canada, the United States, Norway, and Denmark are deeply involved, but non-Arctic players are also entering the scene. China, for example, has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is investing heavily in polar research, ice-capable vessels, and infrastructure projects as part of its broader Belt and Road Initiative. This signals its intention to play a significant role in the region despite its geographic distance. This growing interest has led to what some analysts describe as a cold rush. Countries are racing to map the Arctic seabed, establish territorial claims, and build the infrastructure needed to support economic activity. All of this is happening within the framework of international agreements, such as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This agreement governs how maritime boundaries and resource rights are determined. The result is a complex legal landscape where scientific data, diplomatic negotiations, and strategic positioning all play critical roles in determining who ultimately benefits from the Arctic's transformation. The economic potential of these new trade routes is not just about distance, but also about reliability and efficiency. Traditional routes like the Suez Canal are vulnerable to congestion, geopolitical tensions, and unexpected disruptions. Incidents like the Ever Given blockage highlighted the fragility of global supply chains. This has increased interest in alternative pathways that can provide greater flexibility and resilience. In this sense, Arctic routes are not just shorter, but also strategically valuable as a hedge against risk. However, the Arctic gold rush is not without its challenges. Operating in the region requires specialized ships, advanced navigation systems, and a high tolerance for environmental risk. Conditions can change rapidly, and the lack of established infrastructure means that accidents, spills, or mechanical failures can have severe consequences. These risks are both economic and environmental. They raise concerns about whether the pursuit of profit in such a fragile ecosystem can be managed responsibly. Environmental considerations are central to the debate surrounding Arctic development. The melting ice that is creating new opportunities is also a symptom of climate change. This has broader implications for global ecosystems, sea levels, and weather patterns. It creates a paradox where the opening of the Arctic is both a result of environmental degradation and a potential driver of further harm. Increased shipping, resource extraction, and industrial activity could accelerate the processes that made these opportunities possible in the first place. This tension between economic opportunity and environmental responsibility is shaping policy decisions at both national and international levels. Governments and organizations are attempting to balance the desire for growth with the need for conservation. This has led to discussions about stricter regulations, protected areas, and sustainable practices. These measures aim to mitigate the impact of increased activity while still allowing for some level of development. However, their effectiveness remains uncertain, given the scale and complexity of the forces involved. Technology is another critical factor in the Arctic's transformation. Advancements in ship design, satellite navigation, ice forecasting, and communication systems are making it increasingly feasible to operate in conditions that were once considered too dangerous. These technologies enable not only commercial shipping, but also scientific research, resource exploration, and tourism. Tourism, in particular, is emerging as a niche industry offering access to one of the last truly remote regions on Earth. Infrastructure development is also accelerating. Governments are investing in ports, search and rescue capabilities, and logistical networks to support longer shipping seasons and increased traffic. However, these developments are uneven and often concentrated in areas where national interests are strongest. This creates a patchwork of capabilities that reflects the broader geopolitical dynamics at play. As the Arctic continues to evolve, it is becoming clear that the region is not just a new frontier, but a central component of the global system. It is influencing trade patterns, energy markets, and international relations in ways that extend far beyond its geographic boundaries. This makes it a focal point for both opportunity and conflict as nations and corporations navigate the complexities of a landscape that is changing faster than the rules governing it. The concept of mapping the new North Pole trade routes is therefore not just about charting physical pathways through melting ice. It is about understanding the broader transformation of a region that is moving from isolation to integration. It is shifting from obscurity to prominence, and from a symbol of the unknown to a driver of global change. The implications will be felt across industries, economies, and ecosystems for decades to come. As more data becomes available and more voyages are completed, the Arctic's role in global trade will become clearer. However, one thing is already certain. The era of ignoring the Arctic is over. It has been replaced by a period of intense interest, competition, and innovation where the stakes are high and the outcomes are uncertain, but the potential rewards are too significant to ignore. As this Arctic gold rush continues to unfold, it raises fundamental questions about how humanity approaches new frontiers. It challenges whether the lessons of the past will guide more sustainable and equitable development, or whether The pursuit of profit will once again outpace the ability to manage its consequences. The story of the Arctic is not just about ice and trade. It is about the choices that will define the next chapter of global progress. As interest in the Arctic intensifies, another layer of complexity begins to emerge, which is the militarization of the region. What was once considered a neutral and largely untouched environment is now seeing increased military activity from major powers that recognize the strategic importance of controlling access to these emerging routes. Russia has reopened and modernized several Arctic military bases, deploying advanced radar systems, air defense units, and ice-capable naval forces to secure its northern coastline. The United States has responded by increasing its own Arctic presence, conducting joint exercises with allies and investing in new icebreakers to close the capability gap. This growing military footprint signals that the Arctic is no longer just an economic frontier, but also a strategic one, where power projection and territorial defense are becoming increasingly relevant. At the same time, smaller Arctic nations are navigating a delicate balance between cooperation and competition. Countries like Norway and Denmark, which governs Greenland, are investing in Arctic infrastructure while also advocating for diplomatic solutions and environmental protections. Greenland, in particular, has become a focal point of global attention due to its vast mineral resources and strategic location. As ice melts and access improves, the island is attracting interest from multiple countries looking to secure mining rights and establish a presence in the region. This has sparked discussions about sovereignty, economic independence, and the role of external powers in shaping Greenland's future. Beyond geopolitics and economics, the human dimension of the Arctic transformation is often overlooked but deeply significant. The decisions made in the coming years will not only determine the future of the Arctic, but also set precedents for how humanity approaches other emerging frontiers. As the ice continues to retreat and the map of the Arctic is redrawn, the region is transitioning from a distant curiosity to a central player in the global system. It is no longer a place defined by isolation, but by connection. Trade routes are forming, resources are being mapped, and nations are positioning themselves for a future that is still uncertain, but undeniably transformative. The Arctic Gold Rush is not a single event, but an ongoing process. It is a story that is still being written, shaped by forces that are both predictable and unpredictable. It is a story of opportunity and risk, of innovation and consequence, of ambition and limitation. And at its core, it is a story about how humanity responds when the boundaries of the possible begin to shift. Because in the end, the Arctic is not just opening up, it is redefining what comes next.